Philanthropy is one of the almost unique elements in American society in terms of the way in which the private sector works with the state in order to provide for the health and well-being and progress of the people.
I think that it's part of the social fabric of America, at least over the last, since the 1920s, I'd say, that it's kind of become a partnership. There's certain things that the government has done that have become a part of the social fabric of America. For 200 and some years we've had the private sector, entrepreneurship, and what it does for the sake of business as well as for the sake of social networking and social responsibility. And then you have the nonprofit sector that is mostly private, but it's still an encouragement from government to do certain things that maybe the private sector can't do.
How foundations can and should be nurturing our democracy and playing a special role in our democracy. And the way they can do that is by investing in advocacy and community organizing and civic engagement. It's an important role that philanthropy has historically played, albeit at relatively low levels.
We in America have a unusually weak state sector, a relatively small state, although you never know that to hear some of the criticisms of it. And the private sector works with the public in very unusual ways in order to secure the common good. And I think, frankly, that is the unusual aspect of our society. And to the extent that it works, it really is the secret we have for making an interface between the public and the private.
But we got to remember that none of this would exist, nonprofit or government, if it wasn't for the entrepreneurship of Americans.
So we think of Ben Franklin as a great inventor. We think of the lightning rod and many others. And I think Ben Franklin also invented the matching grant. He managed to raise money from the population for many different ventures, hospitals and hospices, and the universities and scholarly societies and libraries in Philadelphia, and at the same time get the government of the colony to pitch in. He invented a kind of the mixed economy in which we live, where government and civil society combine their efforts.
I think that every person has an obligation to the society around them to make it what it's supposed to be.
I think to the extent that we polarize ourselves and our parties and our society, we do run the risk of not operating as effectively and as efficiently as we could, and not reaching the optimal solutions that we might be able to reach otherwise.
Societies are participatory institutions, whether the government means them to be or not. We all make reality by what we do every day, and what we tolerate and what we won't tolerate. And so there is no such thing as powerlessness. The only powerlessness is self-induced.
I keep quoting my friend John O'Donohue, the former priest and philosopher and poet, extraordinary man, who talked about privilege, and he said we in the West particularly are people of privilege. And what we do not understand too often is that the duty of privilege is absolute integrity.
Moral responsibility devolves on every citizen of a society, whether that society is a democracy or anything else. You have to answer for what you do.
We have to behave like the people we claim to be, instead of just sort of taking it all for granted as though they're everything that's been won over the years by all these hard-fought wars and revolutions and demonstrations and public movements are trophies on a shelf that you can polish periodically. They're not. You know, they're rights, and they are traditions, and they're enshrined not only in law but in our custom, and they need to be renewed. They need to be abided by, and they need to be, I think, honored.
Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for right.
We have the longest democratic tradition of any modern country. We have a tradition of very substantial individual liberty. We have a tradition of a relatively constrained state. We have a tradition of local social and cultural action. I see philanthropy as part of that complex of institutions and ideas. It's not a thing that's independent. It's a part of the social matrix of American history.
On one level, democracy and philanthropy work together very well. On another, they do not. On one level, to the extent that philanthropy is a means for citizens, and not only the wealthiest citizens, but many different citizens, sometimes regardless of their levels of wealth, can contribute to causes larger than themselves. And therefore, they contribute to the common good. When that functions in this direction, then philanthropy just enhances democracy. It's just another way of participating into the common good. Philanthropy and democracy can get into conflict with one another when philanthropy becomes a means of using large amounts of money for enforcing some decisions over others, for giving some people an undue influence, irrespective of democratic principles.
I think philanthropy is not possible without democracy. I mean, it's an aspect of democracy. It's not an inherent or necessary aspect. But I think it's only because we are a democratic society a democratic society with a relatively small state that philanthropy first emerged in its modern form in this country. And I think that tension retains its vitality.
This tension will never fully disappear. But it's extremely important to me, just for the sheer creativity, the need for creativity and the need for investment of the citizenry into the public good to maintain these two sectors together.
And I think it's such an important part of how we make democracy work.